Good afternoon, UCSD students, faculty, and staff. I'm Dr. Jahaz Shine. I'm a naturopathic physician. I'm practicing here in Arizona, and I'm a U.S. Air Force veteran as well, decorated from Operation Enduring Freedom. I'd like to thank you for having me here, to Dr. Gwen, who is a very trusted and dear colleague and friend of mine. I appreciate you doing this, as ethics is such a strong and important topic these days. I'm glad to be on here to discuss this with you. So, today I'm going to just talk about my background and why ethics is so important to me. I hope to fill you in on ethical behavior, integrity, which I use those things kind of interchangeably, uh, how my childhood and upbringing really shaped who I am and how I behave and how I treat others, and why those things are so important to carry with you throughout time, so that when you're confronted with things that trigger you or are emotionally jarring for you, or communities that you just don't understand, how can you move through treating those people and those communities with specific issues that you may not understand? How can you do that with grace and dignity and have them have dignity and respect as patients? So, a little bit about me: I have been in medicine for 20 plus years. I've always known that I wanted to be a doctor since about age 5 or 6. Granted, the type of doctor has shifted and changed over time. Um, I love the topic of ethics, and there's something to be said about being an ethical person. It is in congruence with another favorite word of mine, integrity, as I mentioned before. While giving you my background, I do plan to touch on both of these topics to help you think about your own ethical or moral compass, if you will, and the codes that you abide by. My childhood, it was a very interesting time. I was born in the 70s and predominantly raised in Memphis, Tennessee. And if you know anything about the history of Memphis, you know that it is well known for a few things: blues, barbecue, Elvis Presley or Graceland, and a very dark chapter in civil rights, which was the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The Lorraine Motel, where he was executed, has become one of the national civil rights museums in the United States. All of my life, I have been keenly aware of a few things. One, that I was a woman or a young girl at the time, and that I was Black. That was definitely something that Memphis and being born in the South at that time will remind you of constantly. And I existed in a place that would always keep me on my toes about my Blackness. Um, Memphis is a very southern state, and although its geographical location lends many to believe otherwise, it is very southern. And everywhere you look, there were reminders that the KKK, Civil War, Trail of Tears, and enslavement of Africans was a real thing that actually occurred and was still occurring when I was coming up. There are areas like Whitehaven, White Station, and Germantown who still have those names today. It was a reminder that African descendants were not welcome there. The street auction, which was named from an auction block where enslaved people were sold like cattle, kept its name until approximately maybe a decade ago, which is very recent history. Um, the city parks, everywhere you went, you would see Civil War heroes that were, I would say, they were heralded as heroes in some communities, but to us, it was always a constant reminder of that dark chapter, because a lot of these Civil War generals were also leaders in the Klan. Um, Now, my family lines, I would say it's kind of a blur of African and indigenous Americans, the Chickasaw Indians, and Cherokee Indians kind of dominated in that area. A lot of our history was so blurred and pretty much was written by the white colonizers at that time so that we wouldn't be able to keep up with our history, our bloodlines, because of course, the more you know, the more you know, you're more likely to rebel. So we were stripped of all of those things. Now, when I was growing up and being under the care of my grandmother, she made sure to instill very valuable lessons in me, um, how to cultivate medicine, things that we grew in our backyard. We would make poultices and creams and syrups from, and a lot of that came from, indigenous tribes and her upbringing, because her grandmother was African and Native American as well. So I would say my grandparents definitely shaped, and my parents shaped who I would become by two valuable lessons. Um, and I definitely will touch on what those two things are, because I will want you to think more about those things. That'll be part of your homework assignment later. But they made sure that I knew how to sit, how to eat properly, how to walk, speak, and educate myself so that I can easily move through and adapt to various crowds with success and with giving off the stereotypical air that came with being a Black person. And nowadays, we would know that as code switching. I'm sure some of you have heard that term, and it puts me in the mind of Paul Lawrence Dunbar, who says, "We all wear the mask," right? Who you are at home with your friends versus who you may be at church or in public or in educational settings, professional backgrounds. That's not the same way you would speak and carry yourself. So, in the BIPOC, or Black, Indigenous, and People of Color communities, if you're familiar with their term, BIPOC, that's a more recently coined term to represent the groups of people of color. Um, we know code switching all too well. It was set up so that we can move through these predominantly white career fields, educational systems, and societal norms that were there were mostly whites, where you didn't see a lot of people of color early on. And it was a way to make it was set up so that we could make them feel more comfortable about being with us, so that we wouldn't cause any issues and we can easily move through without triggering anyone to reflect on stereotypes that they may have heard about our communities. Um, my early childhood was definitely shaped in ethics based off the two simple lessons that my grandmother told me. One, if you don't have anything good to say nothing at all. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that statement. And the most invaluable one was, treat others the way you would like to be treated. Would you do something unethical to yourself? Would you not be in integrity with yourself? Would you do things that would cause harm or ignore your own thoughts, feelings, and desires? Usually the answer to that is no. And so I've carried those statements with me throughout my career, and I hold them close to the vest as I've moved through life in general, through my time at the Air Force, and now as a doctor of medicine. The Air Force definitely reinforced the lessons of my childhood by solidifying the values of integrity throughout my career. I tell my daughter the main definition of integrity is to do what's right even when no one is looking. Because, in the great and soulful words of Bob Marley, you can't run away from yourself. And that's how I make every decision in life. Can I live with myself with this decision? Can I sleep well at night knowing I made this decision? If it doesn't feel good to me, I try to not do it. Now, while this isn't a perfect model, it definitely helps a lot. So, in the Air Force, if I could take some time to just tell you about my experience there, I definitely understood for sure what being the minority was. I was on the board of occupational wellness by age 22, which is very young. I was the youngest person, I was the lowest ranking. I was only one of two women on that board. The other was a white female captain. And I was one of two Black people on that board. And the other was a chief master sergeant who was a male. So, right now, even still, the Air Force is predominantly white male. I ran the occupational wellness branch of the Flight, Space, and Missile Medicine Clinic. Um, that was a pretty specific type of medicine. So the majority of my patients were also male because they were the guys who were in charge of launching the rockets and missileers, and they were firefighters and things like that, pilots. So they were always male. And I was just a young Black girl from Memphis, Tennessee, with a giant book this big thrown at me. You have to learn all these things, do it. And I think I had one course at the time on ethics, which I felt like, I don't need that. I'm the queen of ethics. I know all about, people's various religions and beliefs and races and cultures. It mattered not to me, or so I thought at the time. So later on, and I'll come back to that, but I kind of got tired of being on the ground in the Air Force, and I applied to air evacuation school where I got accepted in another field that was predominantly white and male. And I just made the height requirements. I am a little height challenged, I'll say, being only 5'2 3/4", maybe 5'3" if I stand very erect. I was definitely the short one all the time, and one of very few females that were on those various teams. So I definitely had to demonstrate the ability of being able to firemen carry men through very disastrous situations, but it was a must, and I got it done. That job took me to eight to nine different countries with a wide span of different cultures, religious beliefs, and practices that I had never encountered. But it was there that my grandmother's lessons held steadfast. And it would have been the most applicable time to apply that, um, especially when faced with terrorists. I had to be face to face with terrorists and people who wanted to kill us. And although I may not have understood, something in me felt pity for them because they were so young and misinformed and they had no idea. So I looked at that as a brainwashing trauma that had occurred in a young age for some of these men. Um, and while everyone would be standing around and spewing hateful comments, all I could feel was sorrow for both sides because they were so misinformed. And a lot of times that's where these biases come from and are well shaped by misinformation and lack of ability to listen to the other side and just complete ignorance. And I've never wanted to represent myself as one of those people. So what I would say is it made me really hone in on the oath that I took as a medical professional and as an Air Force personnel, that first I will do no harm. I try my best to treat each and every person with dignity and respect. And while I don't always agree with their lifestyle choices or beliefs, it has no bearing on how I go about treating them, and just realizing everybody wants to be heard, respected, and cared for. Every single person on this earth, from children to elderly, Muslim to Christian, whatever the background is, homosexual, heterosexual, bisexual, whatever the group is, whether you agree with their beliefs and actions or choices or not, your job is to provide them with a safe space. And you, I'm sure, will hear me say this again, a safe space for them to honor you with their truth so that you know how to better serve them. Now, as a professor and guest lecturer at multiple universities, I always challenge students to tap into their own inherent biases. We all have them. So when you tap into them, try to create a space where you're free of judgment for yourself. Usually we're the worst critics of our own selves. No one can beat us up like we can beat ourselves up. It's really nothing wrong with discovering you have a prejudice or a bias. The error comes in not correcting it or addressing it, not providing good care for yourself in a safe space where you can express those things with maybe a therapist or other people who are similar to you or completely different from you, as they'll provide a different perspective and maybe give you some insight on how to work through those. So, this will be part of your homework, and I'll repeat that later at the end of this talk. Now, my past biases, I don't mind sharing those with you, and I hope you can allow me to do so where I'm free of judgment. But this is kind of how I noticed that I had biases and how I dealt with them. I've always had a very healthy understanding of the complexities of race and culture. So I didn't have much bias when it came to dealing with that in that particular department. But when it came to other things, I had no idea that it was going to be triggering for me until the person divulged the information. There are two topics in particular that were really rough for me. One of them was addiction, and the other was religious beliefs that would hinder someone from making medical decisions that can be life saving. I had a really hard time with that. And so I realized those things triggered me because A, I didn't understand it. And then B, I had already had some affiliation with two of those things. So whenever it would come up again, after a while, I find myself being almost dismissive. I would almost shut off because something in me did not like those two things. And I didn't understand people's battle with it. Um, but once I began actively listening to the stories of people, I would encounter this thing over and over again. And isn't that how life lessons work? You get beat in the head until, hey, you're either going to submit or maybe just run away from and remove yourself altogether. And I decided to submit. I wanted to learn, I wanted to understand so that I can be a better provider, a better friend, a better listener, and a better human being. Now, the thing about the addiction that got me, whether it was food based, gambling, drugs, alcohol, it didn't matter. It was the entire bracket or umbrella of addictions for me. And, I'm a mother. I have people I love and that depend on me. It was something about choosing, I'm using that word carefully, substances over your family and those who love and depend on you and letting them down. And then doing this over and over and over again. Addiction really is a battle. And I had to see it that way. They wanted to do better, they tried to do better. Many of them had been sober for a while, and then something triggered them that would allow this cascade to occur all over again. So my heart really just started bleeding for this particular group of people. And I had to remove myself in my past experience. I have a family history of addictions with alcohol and people in the family who have used drugs before, and friends who have been addicted to, food or binging and things like that. And I saw how it destroyed their families and connections. And it would hurt me. And that's where it was coming from, a place of hurt. So I had to remove myself from that because it wasn't my story, it was their story. And I had the job to still carry out their medical care it regardless of how I felt. So I had to start looking at myself and figuring out how can I shift out of those things so that I could provide a safe space and still do the type of treatment and provide the same kind of care that I would do for anyone else. Now with the religious affiliation, sometimes that's still a tough one for me. I get it. But I've really learned to just shut that part of myself down and remove myself. Um, I first encountered this when I met a woman who had a severe health issue, a crisis that came up. She had 5 children and a wonderful husband. They loved and supported her so much. And she declined a life saving treatment. And I thought at the time that would have been the only way she would have survived. Now, I wasn't her doctor. Um, I was just, as a friend, just supporting. But I was so upset by the way she kept declining what the doctors offered her. And I said, so you're willing to widow your husband and abandon your children because some God you serve thought or told, what did they tell you? Where did you read this? Why would you think God would stand for that? And I didn't get it. And I was just on her, on her. But what I noticed was how at peace she was with her decision. And I knew it was nothing I could do to change her mind or alter her perception or reality. She declined that treatment and she prayed about it and she sought a different type of treatment. And guess what? She stayed alive. That really shifted me. It is not my job as a doctor to force something on you when you hold the power in your choice. But the power is in a well informed choice. So, my job is to give you all the different avenues of treatment, make sure you understand the risk and the benefits of each treatment, and make a fully informed, consensual agreement on how we're going to go about your care. That's my job. It's my job in congruence with you as the patient or you as a student or whoever it is. When I'm making up even lesson plan ideas, I like to think about what it is that would serve my students the best and what is it that they're asking for. What is it that my patients are asking for? What is it that my child is asking for? And then I try not to come from a position of being above. Doctors are not gods. We are servants, servants of the people. And it's pretty hard to be a doctor without patients, unless you're going to be in research or in the lab or something like that. But my strength is in human connections, helping people meet their goals, not mine. It's not all about me. And how can I do that if somehow my subconscious, deeply embedded prejudices or, misinformation is coming full frontal? It's going to block off my ability to see, to hear, to empathize, and to understand, and to formulate a treatment plan that will work best for that particular individual. We all have a job to do. How do you want to go about doing that job? Because we all know there are some mediocre professionals out there. You could tell they don't really care about anything or anybody, and it's their way or the highway. I choose not to practice in that way. I would encourage you to keep your egos in check and in balance. The only thing I try to bring out my ego for is to make sure that I am giving myself the space to honor my intelligence, my skill, my know how, my bedside manner. I know I'm good at those things. I know I can help people feel comfortable. I know I have good rapport with all types of people. And I take that part of my ego and balance it with, but what can I learn from them? And how can I serve them? I always tell students and doctors when I'm doing these type of presentations, if you come from above here, sometimes people feel like you're literally putting a weight on them. And they may block out some of that because it almost feels like suppression, oppression, or depression. I don't do either well, and most people don't. So if you come from a place of here, so that you can lift a person up, help them in that way, encourage them, create a space for them that they know that their treatment began the minute they walked in that door and met eyes with you and shook hands with you, that you were a person of integrity, that you would provide a space that was free of judgment, that you would help them in the best way that you can based off what their needs are. And if this is an issue of discomfort, I would urge you to just get over that. You don't think it's comfortable or uncomfortable for people who are the only woman in a space, the only Black or Latina or Asian person in a space, the youngest person occupying a space, the only person with any sort of physical or mental disability in a space. You're always going to be questioning when you're the only person in a space, and you still have to move through those spaces with dignity, with grace, with charisma, with code switching, whatever things you use to cope. We have to do that every single day when we're the only person in a space. Remove yourself in your understanding of things and try to start with a clean slate so that when people offer up their story, you can listen actively. You can neural resonate with the person. You can empathize with them and create a platform for where they feel they're most comfortable so that they won't withhold information that can be a block, a stumbling block to their cure. So I encourage you to sit with discomfort. It's okay. So, a piece of advice that I like to give as I'm summing up and closing is that I think one of the fastest ways and best ways to learn about other cultures is just to immerse yourself in them. My daughter and I like to go to Latinx celebrations, Indigenous people celebration, Asian Pacific Islanders. Of course, we go to our own, Juneteenth celebrations, civil rights celebrations. Go. Don't feel bad about going. I had a white colleague call me recently and said, I don't know. Someone told me I have no business going to those things. And I said, who is that someone? You can't take advice from everybody. And everyone in that culture will not feel the same. Go. Take your recorder with you. This will be part of your homework. Interview people from those different backgrounds. Don't be afraid to study the history and understand why, especially in particular, African American and Indigenous Americans are so uncomfortable and distrustful, I would say rightfully so, of the medical community. When you think about things like the Tuskegee experiment, when you think about the concentration camps that happened right here in America, the smallpox blankets that were given, the type of treatments that were withheld, um, Henrietta Lacks. These are all things that are out there. I would encourage you to look up ACT UP and try to find someone that may be a survivor of that time and what was happening with the government and AIDS medications and experiments and how it was even withheld from a lot of men in the gay community, especially transgenders, and how they were definitely treated separately than even the rest of the LGBTQ community. So you just have to learn to get used to discomfort and being okay with it until you're comfortable. Remove yourself from it. Understand how some of these things that still go on today are triggering and can provide like a roadblock to cure, an obstacle to cure for certain groups. Um, in particular, I've had, again, just white colleagues have a hard time with really understanding the levels of trauma within the Black community, how poverty has affected us, how redlining has affected us, how experimental medicine has affected us, and more recently, as a lot of us saw last year, how the death or murders and wrongful convictions of communities of color, in particular African American and Mexican American communities. Every time something like that happens, it's like this collective consciousness of pain that ensues. So when you ask a person, especially from those communities, how they're doing and why are they there, really ask, how are you doing? And from a mental health standpoint as well, don't be afraid to listen to them when they talk to you about these things. I've had patients come in and really cry about the election, and these were white patients, so I can only imagine how my Black patients felt. um, and then when George Floyd was murdered, I had a lot of Black patients come in, and just a lot of Black colleagues, that we had to be there for each other. It was such a painful thing. I'll be honest with you. I think I'd probably seen all of 4 seconds of that video because I refused to subject myself to the trauma. I've been seeing these things since I was a little kid. Rodney King and Martin Luther King, and, being that my parents were bricked and abused for school sit-ins so that they can have the education that they felt like they deserved. So I've known about this history long and strong. I didn't need to reopen those wounds, but it still impacted me. So here's your homework. What lessons on ethics and integrity did you learn in childhood that you utilize today? What are some of the topics or populations or issues that trigger you? And how do you internally address and grow from them? And I want you to find an upcoming cultural activity and visit it. Take a recorder with you and ask people, can you interview them? Look for dates like Juneteenth, Diwali, Asian and Pacific Islander heritage celebrations, and Indigenous powwows. Anything that falls under that bracket. Um, I had a chance to go to a powwow, and I will tell you, even as someone with an Indigenous background, we didn't preserve that part of my culture as much. So to grow into adulthood and be able to go to one when I volunteered to work on the Lakota Sioux Nation reservation, it was very eye opening for a number of reasons. And a lot of those children had never seen a Black person in person, and they were, playing in my hair, pulling my hair and rubbing my skin, and even asking me, do I taste like chocolate? They were just little kids. They were so cute. And to sit and talk with the chiefs and understand how they feel about medicine and the government and society, I understand why they are facing so much detriment and why it's so hard for them to move forward, because of the distrust in their systems. Um, you have to really get to the root cause. And that's what naturopathic medicine is all about. Plug. Um, what is it that is impacting these communities? How is it impacting their health? How has societal ills and systemic and environmental racism played a role in that? How has gender based crimes affected women in those communities? Um, I would really, really encourage you to dig deeper if you want to develop a strong code of ethics. I appreciate you for letting me speak. I hope this has been informative, maybe eye opening, transitional, and pivotal for a lot of you. If you have any questions, please ask Dr. Gwen how to reach me. I will accept all emails from you all. Dr. Shine says at Gmail is my email address. You're welcome to contact me anytime. Thank you so much. And I wish you all the best in your careers as you move forward. And I look forward to seeing and speaking with some of you again in the future. Thank you.